Hi everyone, welcome to Survey Research Methods. Tonight we're going to do a broad overview and introduction to survey research. We're going to talk about why do we use surveys, what's the importance of surveys, and when are they valuable, when are they the most appropriate method to use for a research project. We're going to also talk about some of the sources of error in survey results. And throughout the semester we're going to be talking about design features when you plan a survey to help you minimize or reduce the impact of these types of errors. So let's first talk about the role of survey research in American society. It is a big part of our society in many ways. Here's a quote from the president of the Pew Research Center, quoting from their founding documents. And the Pew Research Center is one of the most prominent survey research methodology organizations in our society. So here's what he said. Fact-based information is the fuel democracies run on. It is the raw material from which societies identify problems and formulate solutions. In other words, it's the way the people in a democratic society give their voice to policymakers and decision makers. So ideally, surveys then, if they're going to play that function, have to capture the voice of all the people. Survey research methods are an important source of both the fact-based information that he's talking about and the voice of all the people within a democratic society. But of course, that has a lot of implications then for how you carefully design them to make sure you're doing both, right? You're getting real fact-based information, you're designing your studies in a credible way, and that you're actually capturing the voice and the voice of all the people. So a very real question then before us as we consider survey research methods is, without fact-based information, without the voice of all the people, can government of the people, by the people, and for the people long endure, or will it perish from the earth? Now here I'm quoting the Gettysburg Address, right? This is how Lincoln, at a time when our country was vastly more divided than it even is today, speaking a couple of days after a massive battle where tens of thousands of people on both sides were killed in one day, and then of course across a series of several days, a really large number of people were killed, approaching more than were killed in all of the Vietnam War. What he was talking about was what was at stake, right? What was at stake? Were we going to lapse back into a more autocratic society, or we're going to move forward, progressing towards a truly democratic society? Well, survey research methods have a place in us evolving towards a more completely democratic society. So survey research methods are currently used in America for government data and reporting. There's many different government agencies that publish survey data on a regular basis, and those results are used to inform a wide range of policy decisions, not just by government agencies, but those surveys are relied upon by people in research and policy making and governance and administration across a wide range of areas. Similarly, market research is the way in our type of society, which democratic society and a free market capitalistic society, that the citizens can speak to the developers and manufacturers of consumer products about their preferences. They also vote with, of course, their wallet, but market research helps plan that, so that it gives companies an opportunity to get closer to what the consumer wants as they develop new products and as they market them and so forth. And then, of course, public opinion research. We're coming into an election period. That's a big thing that the media will be focusing a lot on, and it'll have impact on how campaigns are run, where resources for campaigns are allocated, where candidates travel to appear personally, where and how they make television and radio advertisements, et cetera, et cetera. And then many organizations rely on customer satisfaction surveys for feedback. And of course, program evaluation strategies are often really important in terms of, especially in our field in education, in terms of what policies and programs and instructional strategies get implemented and get disseminated widely. And part of program evaluation is almost always survey research methods. So why do we use surveys? Well, survey research is an appropriate and even necessary methodology, but under specific conditions. It's not the only research methodology, and it does have its limitations. So when are surveys useful? When are they the most appropriate method? Well, surveys are useful when the best or most reasonable strategy for collecting the data of interest is the self-report of individuals within the target population. And this idea of self-report and target population are things we're going to be talking a lot about this semester. You have to define who it is you want to focus on and have a reasonable and scientifically credible method for getting, a very representative voice from that target population. And you have to know that self-report is a reliable way to gather the type of information you're interested in. In other words, can you trust the fact that people can tell you and report in a valid way what it is that you're interested in measuring? So again, survey research is appropriate and even necessary, but under specific conditions. Self-report data is appropriate when the purpose of a study is to access opinions or beliefs or attitudes or perceptions or appraisals or kind of judgments about maybe environmental conditions, working conditions, whatever it might be, from the voice of the target population. That's saying a lot, and it's important to notice what that's not saying, right? When direct observation of behavior or some kind of direct assessment of skills acquired or knowledge gained are more appropriate, then other methods are better than survey research. Self-report data is also appropriate when the purpose of a study is to assess the prevalence or incidence of specific behaviors that cannot be directly observed. So if you're wanting to know over the last month how often have people in your target population engaged in a certain behavior, you don't have the time or money or maybe even the possibility at all of directly observing that. So if you have to rely on self-report and people's recollections and ability and willingness to report those recollections, then survey research is what you need. But there's a lot of ifs there, right? So you have to think carefully about what kind of questions are appropriate, how to word those questions, and whether survey research at all is even the best method. So survey research, again, it's important, it's necessary, but when it's the appropriate method. So self-report data includes reported incidence or prevalence of specific behaviors as provided by key informants. In other words, sometimes you can't directly access the people who were directly responsible for the behaviors, but you can access key informants. Sometimes, for example, principals are the best people to survey about teacher behavior. Other times, teachers are the best people to document for you or report about child behavior in the classroom, and so on. Similarly, parents and in some other conditions. So sometimes survey research is the best method because it's key informants that you're after and not the people who exhibit the behavior themselves. Surveys are often useful when the target population can be defined and an accurate list of the members of that target population is readily available. In other words, if you're measuring something that is appropriate for survey methodology, but you can't access a very accurate, reliable, and up-to-date list of who's in the population, then you can't really be assured that you're getting the voice of all the people or you're getting a representative sample of that target population. So this is one of the things you have to ask yourself. Do we have an accurate, what we call a sampling frame, or a list from which we can draw a sample, or a list from which we can send out our surveys and invite everyone in the population to participate if we think that sampling isn't necessary for our particular study goals. Surveys are also useful when the population can be accessed effectively using the best available list. In other words, it's not just about having the list, but it's having a way to actually get to the people in a way that encourages them, accesses them, encourages them to respond. So for example, if all you have is a list of email addresses, and that they're accurate and complete, but the people you're surveying are not likely to respond to an email about the topic you're studying, then you may not be in the best position to do a survey. Surveys are useful when, of course, You've got the sampling frame, you've got a way to access the population, but then the population itself still has to be willing and able to provide the self-report data, right? So this comes back to not just their ability, but you presenting the survey and designing the survey and collecting the data in a way that makes it inviting and makes people feel like it's important for them to take the time and energy to complete the survey. So I want to talk about a couple of statistical terms that I've used already and just define them, but also I want you to see how the definition of specific statistical terms relates to how you might ask particular questions. This is just an example. There are many others. One of the things we're going to be focusing on as the weeks go on is how do you define exactly what your research questions are, and then how do you think through how to match the best question format to the type of information that you want to collect. Survey research is very much a garbage in and garbage out kind of situation, and if you don't structure your questions in a way that gets the statistic you're most interested in and gets it in sort of an unbiased way, then you're going to have a lot of challenges accurately interpreting your results. So let's look at the first term. The first term is what we call point prevalence, and this is the total number or the percentage of cases exhibiting or experiencing a specific behavior, event, condition, or characteristic at a specific point in time. We're going to look at some examples of this so that these terms come to life a little bit. Period prevalence is a similar kind of statistic, but notice the subtle wording differences here. The total number or percent of cases exhibiting or experiencing a specific behavior, event, condition, or characteristic across a specific time period, often say something like during the last month or during the past 12 months. And so if you're interested in what percentage of people would say a certain thing at this moment in time, that's a point prevalence statistic, and that has implications for how you ask a question. If you're interested in how many people would report a certain type of answer over the last year, over the last month, then that has other implications for how you design and present the question. Similarly, there's a couple of other ways to spin this. Lifetime prevalence has to do with the total number or the percent of cases exhibiting or experiencing a specific event, behavior, condition, or characteristic, which could be like an opinion or an attitude or something like that, or an appraisal, across a person's lifetime. And then incidence is similar to all of this, but it's about the percent of new cases at a specific point in time. So we can even think of all these things in terms of COVID, right? The point prevalence is, right now, what percentage of Americans have COVID? The period prevalence is, over the last month, what percentage of Americans have had COVID? The lifetime prevalence is, what percentage of Americans have ever had COVID across their lifetime? And the incidence is, how many new cases are we experiencing today? And if you notice, during the pandemic, we had the media reporting these statistics all of these ways and not always being very clear about which statistic it was that they were reporting, thus creating some kind of confusion for the general public. So just to repeat the example again to make it clear, all of these points we're talking about have implications for question design. So let's look again just quickly at the concept of the pandemic and the type of statistics that were reported and the way the questions were asked to get at them. Are you currently experiencing symptoms of COVID? That's point prevalence. Have you tested positive for COVID in the past month? That's period prevalence. Have you ever tested positive for COVID? That's lifetime prevalence. And are you experiencing COVID symptoms for the first time today? That's incidence or new cases. Now we could take this example just to drive the point home a little bit more and convert it to something that's important in schools today. The whole vaping phenomenon has become kind of an issue with middle schoolers and high schoolers, even a distraction to the instructional process. School system might be interested in, well, how big of a problem is this for us, and what do we need to do about it? And they might survey different groups of stakeholders. They might survey parents with one set of questions, principals, maybe teachers with another set of questions, but they might survey students too. Now, this is a little bit of a sensitive topic, so I'm just using this illustration to talk about how the questions might be answered, but how the survey is presented and how the data is collected, because this could be seen as kind of a sensitive behavior. People might not always tell the complete truth about. It's important. There's a lot of other design features here, but let's just look at question construction for the moment. So do you currently use a vaping device? Point prevalence. Have you used a vaping device in the past month? Period prevalence. Have you ever used a vaping device? Lifetime prevalence. And did you start using a vaping device for the first time today? This is about new cases or, of course, incidents. Okay, so now let's talk about some important terms that we'll be revisiting throughout this course that have to do with the sources of error in survey research. So the first one is sampling error, and this is always present in most kinds of research, right? What this means is you didn't ask everybody in the population, you asked a sample, so the question is, how representative is that sample? How large is that sample? And what's the likely influence of sampling error on the statistics that sampling strategy produces for you? So this is where we'll get into later in the semester things like margin of error and confidence intervals. And some of that may be, review from previous courses for you. Let's talk quickly about response bias, and again, we're going to be revisiting these topics throughout the semester, but response bias is there something about the way the question is asked that leads to maybe not the best answers, maybe the most valid or truthful answers from the participants. Non-response bias has to do with, well, who didn't get in the sample in their proper proportions, so maybe you have a biased sample that overrepresents some people, underrepresents others, so the voice of all the people isn't there in the sense that it's not there in its proper proportions, giving you an accurate and trustable result for the whole population. And then measurement error has to do with, how do we score this? What do we do with the data? If we make scale scores or composite scores of some sort, are they trustworthy? Are they reliable, valid, and culturally sensitive? So again, let's just review sampling error. Sampling error, whenever statistical indices are estimated from sample data, some sampling error is likely to occur, right? You can't avoid it. You'd be very, very lucky if you took a sample, not a survey that went to the entire population or census, and you got exactly the right answer. Likely you're going to be, a little bit off from the perfect answer had you talked to everyone. A sample statistic is not going to estimate a population parameter with exact precision. But the question for survey research is, how exactly accurate do we need it to be? What can our margin of error be? And we can still make a reasonable conclusion. So sampling error is the difference between the sample statistic and the unknown population parameter. Right? We don't know what the real answer is if we were to talk to everyone in the population and get their most truthful answer. That's why we're doing the study, but we know we probably can't afford to do it with everyone. So we have to, because of time and money, we have to do it with a sample. Only taking a census and getting everyone in the population to give their true voice would completely avoid sampling error. So again, it's almost always going to be there. But even if you were able to very, very carefully minimize or even completely eliminate sampling error, that doesn't necessarily mean you've avoided other types of error. So let's just review again what those are. So response bias, it's a general term. It means respondents may not be completely accurate in their responses to self-report measures such as surveys. Survey responses may not reflect, in other words, the respondents' true answers with complete accuracy. Well, you might say, well, why not? Well, this can come from a variety of factors. Question wording, the survey format, the method you use to collect the data, and all kinds of respondent motivational factors. And that could vary from one study to the next, but it could be, do some respondents see these questions as sensitive or leading or too private to reveal in a public survey. Now let's talk quickly about non-response bias. Non-response bias occurs when the sample statistics from the results of a survey do not estimate the population parameters exactly because the sample does not represent the population. In other words, just in a simple way, did you get a biased sample or not? Or did you have everybody in the sample, in the population, represented within your sample. So this can happen in a couple of ways. It can happen when, of course, the sample does not represent the population. It can happen when some characteristics of the population are present disproportionately in the sample. In other words, some groups are overrepresented, other groups are underrepresented. And it has to have one additional component to qualify as non-response bias. It also has to be true that this disproportionate representation idea has to be connected to what you're actually measuring, right? If everyone in the population has very, very similar, even exactly the same opinions, or would answer the questions in very similar ways, then it may not matter if you have some slight disproportionality. On the other hand, if there are very real differences between subgroups, and often there are important differences, then not representing every group proportionally does cause biased results. Now let's talk quickly about measurement error. Measurement error can be a large factor impacting the validity of survey results, maybe even larger than the other sources. And this comes about when survey responses are combined to make scale scores. So, for example, if you embed within a survey an existing measure, and that measure itself does not have complete reliability or validity, cultural sensitivity, then you can't expect the scores you get from your survey then to be completely valid either, right? In other words, you're dependent on how well your composite scores that you form from the survey items, how well those scores function. If survey researchers use scale scores, in other words, as they score the survey in a particular way rather than just using the information from individual items in a very descriptive way, then they're responsible for providing evidence to support an argument for the reliability, validity, cultural sensitivity, and fairness of the interpretation of the results. In other words, you're not exempt from measurement error if you combine scores together into total scores of some sort. Now, oftentimes that can be a really good way to go, but it doesn't exempt you from making sure that that's an appropriate thing to do. So let's just talk quickly about how surveys are different from other methods. How are surveys different from true experiments? Well, in general, true experiments, we're looking at the effect of a treatment, and we randomly assign people to get or not get the treatment, or to be in certain treatment conditions and comparison conditions so that we can have a real sense of the effectiveness of a treatment. That's very different than a survey. Survey, we're usually looking at a single point in time, snapshot, how do people feel, how would they report their opinions and attitudes and behaviors. Different from quasi-experiments, well, again, generally we're not looking at the effects of a treatment. We're not looking at whether groups that have not been randomly assigned but are in different conditions, how do they behave differently. And program evaluation, well, surveys alone are not the whole of program evaluation, but they can be certainly involved in that. But surveys, again, are looking at opinions, attitudes, reported behaviors, etc., whereas program evaluations are looking at the effect of some kind of social program. How well is it meeting its goals and objectives? How well is it reaching the target population? But surveys, of course, can play a role in all these studies, right? In true experiments and quasi-experiments, we're often interested in, say, in educational context, well, what did the teachers think of the treatment? How did they implement it? What did they think about the training? You know, all that can be an important part of evaluating the effectiveness of some kind of treatment. Same with program evaluation. The opinions of people that experienced the program and had to deliver the program are very important to understanding how well it's working and how it's working. Okay, so where do we end up with all this introductory material? Well, again, surveys can provide meaningful information. They can answer certain types of research questions. And self-report data can be useful and valuable. However, asking the wrong question, asking poorly designed questions, all these things can impact the validity of the results. And so you have to carefully plan a survey to consider all these possible sources of error as you're going through the planning process. So sampling error, response bias, non-response bias, and measurement error are nearly always present in survey research. It's simply a social science research methodology that has its place, that has certain types of data that it can collect, but most likely can be trusted more when surveys are carefully designed and a lot of these considerations are included in how you collect the data, how you design the questions, and how you encourage the respondents to participate in your survey so that you get a large response rate. Okay, well that's it for week one. We'll pick it up next week.